I'm Deborah Jaffé, and my father was Benny Jaffé, known as Friedel. My father was in Berlin on Kristallnacht, and he told me the safest place to be was out on the streets. And I have a photograph of him by the Brandenburg Gate a couple of days afterwards. They knew they had to get out, and the correspondence I found is this absolute desperation to go anywhere. Exit visas were not forthcoming, and by the time that they did leave, it was getting increasingly difficult. They needed guarantors here to come up with quite a considerable amount of money. So when he arrived in London in March 1939, he had two sisters and a brother already in London, so he stayed with them, but he was not allowed to work. There are records of him having gone, once war was declared, to a sort of tribunal meeting in Hampstead in North London, near to where he was living with his parents in Kilburn. And it would seem that he was exempt from internment, but that enabled him then to have a work permit. And I think around about that time, he then went up to Littleborough and joined the Lancashire Tanning Company. A couple of days after war was declared, the police came to the tannery in Littleborough to intern two Germans, because they were still Germans, although they didn't want to be. So it was my dad and another person who were interned. Now, I now know that did not happen on the 3rd or 4th of September 1939. It was much later that he was interned. But he was interned at Warth Mills, and part of his official story was how horrendous the conditions were there. He always said it was just an awful mill in Bury, and given that we lived in Bamford, which is the Bury side of Rochdale, whether he didn't know the location, I don't know, but he never took me back there, and yet he took me to the place where he was born in Germany. His way out of the dreadful conditions at Warth Mills was to join the British Army, and he was finally demobbed in 1946. What he always said was he was very, very grateful to Britain. The one thing he absolutely loathed about it was the weather. And I mean, he was very, very witty. And when he died, although he never joined a synagogue, but when he died, we did get a rabbi to his funeral, and I said, I just never understood it. He had a cracking sense of humour, and he was always the optimist. And the rabbi said, yes, a lot of them were, because they had encountered such dreadful things that no matter what, it could never be as bad as what they'd experienced. I do wonder what it must have been like that he'd found refuge here. He always talked very warmly about the wonderful landlady he had in Smithy Bridge Road, you know, who had never met a foreigner before, but she suddenly said, "You're really nice as a foreigner." And he took that as a great compliment, and how friendly people were. And then suddenly to be rounded up and into dreadful conditions. I think there's an awful lot of history here that can be learnt, and what worries me now is that people are not looking at history, the example of history.